Judgment in the appeals P and Cheshire West and Cheshire Council and P and Q against Surrey County Council.
Under Article 5 of the European Convention on Human Rights, no one shall be deprived of their liberty except in accordance with a procedure authorised by law and in one of a defined list of circumstances, which include the lawful detention of persons of unsound mind. Accordingly, if a person is deprived of his or her liberty, this has to be authorised, either by a court or by the administrative procedures known as the deprivation of liberty safeguards, set out in the Mental Capacity Act 2005, and periodically reviewed to see whether the arrangements made are still in his or her best interests. The three people with whom the court is concerned are all severely mentally disabled. Two of them are sisters, who were removed from home while they were children because of the risk of abuse. One sister, whom we shall call Mig, was placed with a foster mother whom she regards as her mum and who provides her with intensive support in almost every aspect of daily living. She's never tried to leave, but would be restrained if she did so. The other sister, whom we call Meg, was placed in a small residential home for learning disabled adolescents with complex needs. She too would not be allowed to leave. She has tranquilizing medication and sometimes requires restraint because of her challenging behavior. The third, P, a 38-year-old man with cerebral palsy and Down syndrome, was placed in a small group home with other disabled residents. He required prompting and help with all the activities of daily living and constant supervision. As the judge held, he could not go anywhere or do anything without the support and assistance of the house staff. No one doubts that these arrangements have been made with the best interests of these three people in mind. They are as much like ordinary living arrangements as it is possible for them to be. But that is not the issue. The main question is whether adults with their disabilities have the same right to liberty as everyone else, or whether, as the Court of Appeal held, their lives have to be compared with those of people with similar disabilities to theirs. The Supreme Court holds that people with mental disabilities have the same right to liberty as everyone else. If their living arrangements would amount to a deprivation of the liberty of a non-disabled person, then they are also a deprivation of the liberty of a disabled person. The fact that the arrangements made are in the best interests of that person means that the deprivation may be justified, but not that it is not a deprivation at all. The Strasbourg case law acknowledges that the difference between a restriction and a deprivation of liberty is one of fact and degree, depending on the concrete situation of the person concerned. But in the cases concerning the placement of mentally disabled people in hospitals and care homes, the acid test which the court has applied is whether the person is under continuous supervision and control and is not free to leave. The Supreme Court unanimously holds that the trial judge was right to hold that P, the man, had been deprived of his liberty. By a majority, the court also holds that Mig and Meg have been deprived of their liberty. Both were under continuous supervision and control and were not free to leave their placements. The minority hold that the sisters have not been deprived of their liberty. The minority are concerned that nobody using ordinary language would describe people living happily in a domestic setting as being deprived of their liberty, and the Strasbourg court has yet to consider a case of this type. The majority consider that because of the extreme vulnerability of people like P, Mig and Meg, it is appropriate to adopt a cautious approach, which will mean that there are periodical checks to ensure that their living arrangements are justified in their own best interests. This is not to stigmatise either them or their carers, but simply to recognise that they are entitled to the same dignity and status as human beings as the rest of us. Thus, the appeals are allowed. The court is now adjourned.